Well, hello, my name's Michael Groves and I'm here to talk to you today about a revolutionary way to light your hobby using fibre optics. And I really want to thank Hert and Gordy for bringing this program to us, because usually I'd be at a show like this, as many of you would be. This was the Amherst show back in January of this year. So this gives us a huge opportunity to come in front of a whole lot of our friends and people and just enjoy some time together. Well, before we go into this presentation, I just want to show you a little bit about the layout, and you're going to see a little bit of what we've done on it. So this is part of the layout that we have in the basement, and just showing you, giving you an idea of what it looks like, obviously without any of the lights on it. This is a section that actually I've worked quite hard on in terms of putting some lights into it, and you'll see this during parts of this talk. But of course, adding lights really does change everything. It really comes much more alive. And there's even lights there on the cars. And then as we come across, come back to sort of the English village scene, you might say, with the Rolls Royce there and the traffic island and a church. The lighting really does change the dynamic considerably. I'd like to give you now a brief history of my model railroading. Really, it started at age 11 and then promptly stopped at age 13 because we left England, went to Australia, and I went to boarding school there, played a lot of music, did a lot of different things, started working, and it wasn't until age 31 that my son, age 7, was given a train set by my wife, who then said to both of us, "It is time for you to play together." And so that's when my hobby started all over again. But then at age 55, I sawed the whole piece into parts because we were moving from New Jersey into Pennsylvania. And so I didn't have a machete at handy, so there's my saws all laying there, and we cut it apart. It was pretty brutal. My son put up with it. He'd done a lot of the hard work of laying trestles, hand-laid track, and so on. But we made it, and we moved to Pennsylvania. Now, one of the things that I learned, though, was that rejoining sections is a royal pain. And the second thing I learned during this process was that rewiring is a absolute headache. And of course, what had happened was I actually had laid out my basement. My wife had told me to lay it out before putting the train room in. And by that time, all the labels had fallen off the wires, and I didn't know which wire was which. Well, before we get any further, I'm going to talk a little bit about then what had we used for lighting. Well, we started with grain of wheat bulbs. My son put these together for us. I rarely, if ever, turn those on. Why? Because if they burn out, we're stuffed. I'm not going to replace them. I have a rower station up there with these grain of wheat bulbs, but it still look very attractive. But what I learned is, of course, they're very small and bright. They're horribly difficult to solder, lots of wiring involved, and horribly difficult to replace. Fortunately, I haven't had to replace any of them. Then, of course, along came LED lights, and so I worked into that. And LED lights have some specific challenges. One is that there's an anode and a cathode. So in fact, they're polarized. You can't just wire them without regard to polarity. So that is a bit of a challenge in implementing LED lights, but most people have got over that. I went to a website which many of you are familiar with, Evans Designs, and they got this huge range of LEDs, great, and different colors, really fancy stuff. But then I looked at another slide on Evans Designs and I said, well, that's interesting. All that wiring, am I going to go through all of this again? or I'm going to do something different. And of course, my biggest concern was to end up with spaghetti wiring. And that's something you want to be super beware of. In fact, Rick Wilkins at 2009 Amherst meeting showed me this control board. Then he flipped it over and showed me the spaghetti that's there, right there. And basically I would just say, don't let this happen to you. Well, one of the nice creations has come from Woodland Scenics, and they've produced a system in which they've integrated all of the wiring into boxes, so it's really what they call a just plug system. Very attractive from the point of view of you don't have to sort out polarities or wires. All you do is just plug the system together. Now it comes with many components, and that for me is a bit of a challenge, because if I'm ordering or if I'm putting something together, I've got to plan my ordering from them in order to get the right components. There's also a fair amount of real estate required, and that's, as we're going to see, is a bit of a challenge. So LEDs, summary: inexpensive, long-lasting, polarity and voltage are critical. Spaghetti wiring is still a challenge unless you use something like the just plug system from Woodland Scenics. So why didn't I go with a just plug system solution? First of all, I found it a bit expensive. 2, it takes up a lot of space underneath the layout with all those control boxes. But I think most importantly for me, it limits creativity. I enjoy being creative, and having a system like this limited what I could be doing. So then I thought, well, how about fiber optics, right? No wiring, easy to install, but how are you going to power these things? Now, people had told me, you know, you can't do that, Michael. Well, you don't say that to a physicist. And that's my background, because that was the big challenge. And so I worked on thinking about it, and I thought, what would be some key attributes for a lighting system? So here they are. Realism was around really key. Reliability, ease of installation, needed to be cost effective. And again, for me, really important to provide for imagination. So I set to work, and there's my system. It consists of some fibers into a heat shrink tube. The other end of that is a LED that actually is used in cars, headlights. A nice big heat sink on it and a fan at the back of it to keep it cool. And then a small power supply. And so I lived with that for a couple of years on my train layout and started building the whole system up, and enjoyed that until really my grandson came along at age 13 to me and started working on some electronics. And that was rather fun. We started working together, and of course I recognized, well, he's probably got some engineering skills, and if he's going to go to university for engineering, it's going to cost a whack of money. How about we start a company to pay for that? So that's how the company came about. Was talking with Austin, and he in fact helped name the company as well as the product, and that's our first product, was the Lamplighter 1, which you see there, into which you plug the fibers. And the idea really is conceptually very, very simple. All we do is take the Lamplighter 1, take a fiber, drill a hole, run it up into a building, you got light. Take a light, alternative, a lamp say, and you can run that down, the fiber down, into the lamplighter. It couldn't be simpler. In fact, that's what I discovered from my own layout. So here's one of our lamps, perched over the top of a Rolls Royce. Naturally, I had to have a Rolls Royce. I've given up thinking about owning one of those now, so this is probably as far as I'm ever going to get. And here you can see it actually in situ with some of the buildings lit around there, some of the swan neck lamps. There's a roundabout there, all the normal things, and an English crossing gate as well. A little bit closer, and you can get a better idea of the focus of this light onto the roadway. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. Well, you know, it's really great to just add lighting where you want. So you can see those guys in the picture there. They're digging in a road, and of course we're always digging roads up and filling them in. That seems to be what goes on all the time, much to motorists' annoyance. But when I didn't have a light there, nobody really noticed it. But as soon as I popped a little light on there, boing, it really popped out. And of course, there's a little mini miner there with a light shining on it. But you'll notice that, in fact, for the light, it's really a nice conical, about a 40-degree spread on that beam, unlike an LED, which is more typically about 135-degree spread. Now, I took some of these round to one of my friends in the area, and Al Judy, and he actually took some of them, rusted them up, made them look older, and put them on his scenery. So that was rather fun. Well, of course, I had to have somebody to make these, and there's one of our dwarves. He's the youngest, Benjamin, and there he is making a set of swan neck lamps, and those are the ones that are around on quite a lot of layouts around the world now. Well, one of the things I do like is an English pub. And so I built one from scratch, just out of my own mind and so on. But I obviously wanted to put a whole load of lighting into it. So I did that. And I wanted to put some lighting up into the trees because I love that sort of fairy lighting feel. And there we are, small fibers, just poke them up into a tree, very simple. But I also wanted to have some lighting on the underneath the umbrellas, so there was lighting on the tables. And again, very easy, just put a fiber up there and I've got lighting. So the next slide actually just shows you a railway station behind that pub, and I didn't put a light on at that time where those men are digging, and you can't see them at all. They're right there next to the London taxi. Well, there's my fibre spaghetti. And yeah, you obviously do end up with a bit of a spaghetti. But the nice thing about it, I was worried about it at first, was there's a glow from those fibres. So I turned the lights off completely and I got underneath and I could see exactly where every light was. That's tremendously useful when you want to move things around. It's also interesting for children, as Paul McCarthy, who's one of my customers, discovered, and he sent me this great picture of his grandchildren looking up at the fibre spaghetti underneath his layout. So here was the lamplighter design. Needed a very bright LED. I wanted to make sure it was easy to mount, so it's just got a couple of screw holes there. There's very few components needed to do the lighting, and it's very easy to trace the lighting. So if you look at it overall, it's really what I think of a 2 or 3 component system. So there it is, there's the lamplighter box and some fibre. Well, maybe you want to put some lamps on. So here we go. So we've got a lamplighter and some lamps, or maybe all 3. So we want some fibre into buildings, we want some lamps and so on. So basically, with 3 components and a drill, you're away. Let's take a look at what happens is I looked at the layout that's right behind me, and I've got a 6-foot section here that I've lit. And I want to describe that a little bit in terms of the components and compare what it is with my system, or the Dwarvin system, versus, say, using something like the Just Plug system. So here we go. So I've got 16 buildings lit up. I've got 22 street lamps. I've got 3 umbrellas and 1 tree. I'll use 3 lamplighter 1 boxes underneath the layout. And the cost for all of that list is $400. Well, remember, there's a lot of components in the Just Plug system. So I called them up and I said, okay, so what do I need to do in order to make this work for me? So I described the system and knew exactly what I needed for lighting, of course. And this is what they came back to me with. And you can see it's just quite a lot of components, and you've got to get it right. Otherwise, you're going to be having to order again and wait and so on. But the cost of the system was $560, so that's a little bit more. The other thing, though, with the real estate requirements, you can see they like to have sort of a linear array of those little modules they've got. So if you took the Just Plug system with, say, 13 boxes, which is what they're suggesting, assume a ½ inch between them, you end up with about 4'4" of space underneath my layout at the front that's fully taken up. And I've only got 6 foot, and it's on a curve, in fact. The Dwarvin system, it's only 3 boxes, mount them where you need, and and again, my layout's 6 foot wide. So to lay that out, it was going to be a lot more of a challenge. Now, I want to answer another question, which is important, which is what does it really cost then to put one light into a system? So the Lamplighter box will accommodate 13 of the 1.5 millimeter fibers, that's the diameter, or 28 of the 1 millimeter fibers. So on an average, you could probably use about 20 fibers for different light structures, depending upon how much light you need in each of those structures. And so total list cost for the starter kit that includes 30 foot of fiber is $85. So the cost per structure for the lighting is $4.25 each. Let's take a look for a moment at how that compares with Woodland Scenics. Again, I'm not going to go through all the components there, but adding them up, list cost was $231, and so a cost per structure of the lights was $11.50 to do the same job, and that's really quite a lot more. Let's go back for a moment and talk about having some imagination and fun. So I put together a diorama which I'll take around to most of the shows, and it just shows off a number of different lamps. But one of the fun things that I did with it, and you can see that here, you can see there's a tent, and what I did was stick a very small fibre up there because obviously you don't want it really glowing. There's also a car back there with its headlights on. Actually, I put 1 millimeter fibres in there, and it probably could have done with 0.75 because it looks like it's got its high beam on crazily. But anyway, so you can light cars easily. There's one of my old cars. It was looking a bit dishevelled, so I just stuffed some lights into it. So that's the product that we came up with, and my second oldest grandson, or youngest grandson I should say, is David, and he does all the manufacturing now of those Lamplighter boxes, and so I thank him. He's one of our dwarves, as we call him. So we've got a bunch of different products. We've got an HO carriage lamps, HO globe lamps, and those are actually produced using 3D printed bases and posts. So really it's quite an interesting technology. Then we have some highway lamps. That took a while to develop as I was looking for a way in order to get the fibre come up and then do a right angle, the light to do a right angle bend. So there's actually a mirror in the top there to produce the light down onto, or shine down onto the highway. But then came out with industrial building lamps. It was interesting, we took those to a show, and actually it was the NMRA last year, and within 4 hours we'd sold out completely. That was a big surprise to me, and that's actually probably our biggest selling product today in terms of lamps. Well, we also have scaled into the O gauge, so we've got swan necks for them, the carriage globe lamps. Now that's an interesting area because one of my concerns was, that's going to probably require a bit more light than an HO setup. So we developed a Lamplighter 2 box. It's what I think is the big brother to the Lamplighter 1. Has basically about 50% increase in light output, and it's double the capacity of the fibers compared to the Lamplighter 1. So again, I designed it really for the O scalers, but also for HO people who maybe want to do a whole village. So in fact, we'll talk about it in a moment, how I replaced some of my Lamplighter 1s with the Lamplighter 2 in order to consolidate and reduce the cost of my layout even. But what surprised me is I've had a bunch of N scalers who've actually bought this product, and it's clear that they just wanted to have one box to light everything on their very compact layout. So actually, if you took a look at what happens if you move to a Lamplighter 2 box in terms of its cost effectiveness, an average of 40 fibers to light different structures, again using that similar arithmetic I did before. The total cost then for a starter kit is $139, and that includes 60 foot now of fiber. And so the cost per structure drops down to $3.46. So what I did, as I said, I substitute a Lamplighter 2 box for my layout, And now for all these components, my list cost drops to $284 compared to, again, the Woodland Scenics at $560. So I think you can see there's quite a value in doing that, making that move. Well, let me now change gears completely for a moment and just talk about some what I call tips. Tips for using fiber optics, because for many of us, some of us know a lot about them, but I've had to come along the learning curve myself. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is cutting them. Do never use wire cutters. What it does is it pinches the fiber instead of slicing. You want to slice through it. The best is in fact a utility knife. Alternative are some shearing action cutters which have very firm, stiff blades in them. That'll give you, or even some wire strippers. They often have a scissor-like action at the end of those, or at the beginning part of those, and that will give you an excellent cut. Very important to do. Well, many times you really want to change the color of the light. I came across these Tamiya translucent paints and just dab onto a paintbrush a little bit of red onto the end of a fiber, and hey presto, I got my house on fire. Very, very easy approach to changing the colors. And indeed, so there it is in one of my other buildings, in fact, one of my buildings behind me. And key with fiber optic lighting, there's no heat dissipated near the building at all. It's all dissipated in the lamplighter box. That's a bit of a freebie, as I might say. I always put tissue paper or something behind the windows so that you're not seeing directly into the building. And one day I just ran some crayons across it, just like a child would, and slapped that up. And hey presto, there I had curtains. Wow, that was a cheap way to do it. Anyway, as I say, that's a freebie. Last Christmas I was playing around and I thought, what if I nick this fibre? My wife had been doing that actually at a show. So we did that, and I then just painted those green, red, and yeah, you can see what comes up. Looks like Christmas lights. So this last Christmas I did another thing, which is, there's my English pub, and of course you want to have Christmas lights on it. There's 60 lights on that outside of that pub. It took me half an hour to do all of that work. Just imagine trying to do that with LEDs. So, but the first time that I showed this product, actually somebody asked me, well, how do you change the intensity? I said, well, you can't really. And then I thought, what a fool you are, Michael. All you need to do is just pull the fibre slightly out of the box and it's going to decrease the light intensity. So that's the very simple way. If it's too bright, you can just change the light intensity very easily. Now, obviously, bending fibres is kind of important. The very thin fibres, well, they'll bend around anything, but a 1.5mm fibre is a little bit on the stiff side. So what I've found out that you can do very easily is if you use boiling water, don't put your hands in it, but if you use boiling water, I use some aluminum tubing on the fibre, you can bend that fibre into shapes and it will hold that shape as soon as you take it out of the boiling water. I haven't found that at all on websites. They usually talk about using hot air guns and so on, and I've managed to melt the fibre quite a few times. So this is a fail-safe way where you don't melt the fibre. So you can make multiple bends to go around corners and so on, but do be careful, because if you make too sharp a bend, then you're going to lose some of the light. And in this particular case, the bend is very sharp and I've got quite a lot of light loss. What's going on, of course, is the fibre holds the light in it and the light bounces back and forward, but and up and down. But as soon as it comes to a corner, if the bend is too sharp, you're going to lose some of the light. So I actually have some guidelines for typical bend radiuses. So for a 1.5mm fibre, I recommend a minimum radius of about 6mm, and for a 1mm fibre, it's about 4mm. But having said that, experiment with it, because you could see on that Christmas, the pub lit up, actually had the fibre coming up a drain pipe, basically looking like a drain pipe. I'm making a fairly sharp bend and I still had plenty of light in it. So How about connecting fibres? Well, maybe you cut it too short. Maybe you've got a modular layout and you just want to be able to take things apart. Or maybe you want to connect a number of different fibres, smaller ones, into a larger one. And I've done that, especially when I'm lighting cars. That's exactly what I do. So a very simple system. What I've done is I've taken some aluminum tubing, cut it down to about 1 inch long, and then I use a coupling solution, which is actually a silicone gel, that has the same optical density or refractive index, as we call it, as the fibre. It's about 1.5 refractive index. And what it does is it doesn't allow the light to escape. So when you're butting the two fibres together and there's an air gap, there'll be about 30 to 40% loss of light. With this approach, you reduce that loss very considerably. So there, what I do is I take a fibre, I stick it into the aluminum tube, put some of that gel on the other end of it when it's poking out, pull the fibre back in a bit and connect it to the other fibre that I want to join up with. Those are the K&S tubes that I use for the 1.5 and the 1.0 millimetre fibres. And so we end up with those connector kits, and we have them for a 1.5 millimetre fibre and a 1.0 as well. People often ask, well, what happens? How do you keep the fibres in the box? Well, we have a grommet at the end that has, as you can see, fins on it, and that really holds the fibre in place. If you only put 1 or 2 fibres in, naturally they're going to fall out, but then again, I'd ask, why do you need a box like this for just 2 lights? But once you put about 3 in, it's going to grab them. The other thing about fibres, though, fibres tend to be cylindrical. They have been wrapped around a drum, and they come off that, and they naturally want to take that shape. So when you stick the fibre into, if you stick only a few fibres into a box, you'll end up with the fibre not being parallel with the axis of the box. And what that just means is it's not going to pick up the light inside very well. So what I recommend is, if you're not using a lot of fibres, if you're using a lot of fibres, it straightens everything out. If you're only using a few fibres, and let's say you're only using 20 in a Lamplighter 2 box, insert some other fibres, sort of dud ones, or plastic stirring straws, whatever, that at least 3 inches in length so they don't fall inside the box and so on. And that's going to straighten your fibres out, and it will give them increased efficiency of light collection. So very, very simple approach. So let me just sort of now go back and sort of summarize what I see as the key benefits that I've discovered as I've worked with fibre optic lighting. Number one is the realism aspect. It's very easy to light so many different buildings, structures, and again, adjust the intensity to what I need. I can literally add lights in seconds. I did a test recently where I put a village together, or I had a village and I wanted to light it, and I put in 9 lights, and it took me 10 minutes to do the whole job, and then I could sit back, have a cup of coffee and enjoy the scenery. But of course that's because there's no wiring involved, and that for me as I've got older is a key aspect. Again, no heat dissipated in the buildings. That's key. I can have it as bright as I want and know that I'm not going to have any issue with whether I'm using tissue paper nearby or anything like that. I believe it's a cost-effective solution, and you can tell that. But I think it allows for a lot of creativity. And I think finally, people have been saying to me, and this is something I've been learning recently, they've said, Michael, this really is the next generation of lighting. We've gone from grain wheat bulbs to LEDs, and now fibre is going to be the new wave. And I think you can really see why, because obviously this is a challenge for most people, but plus it's much easier to stick a fibre into very, very small spaces. So again, well, my wife got a bit crazy and decided that my drill needed to have some social distancing and a face mask on it. So anyway, so we have the Lamplighter one, we have a fibre and a drill. So that's all you really need. So my motto is really, it's a 3-step process. Attach the Lamplighter underneath your layout, drill the holes, stick up the fibre, and you're done. I don't know about you, but I love seeing other people's layouts. And so we've put on our website, we've got what we call a customer showcase. And I'm really pleased with the number of customers who are sending in images of what they've been doing. So I'd like to really give you a bit of a flavour for that, just a bit of a buzz, I think. One of the first ones was by Mark Jewett. Mark does a lot of reviews for NMRA magazine, and back in May 2019, he put this in, and he put this actually into the magazine, and that was quite a delight for us. There's some globe lamps, and he's lit the inside of the train station. By the way, the train station was immobile, so he was actually couldn't move that. He had to drill underneath, and he was worried that initially he wouldn't be able to get any lighting in it, but of course a small hole, the light's there. He was really pleased with that. Some more lighting. Oh, and one of the fun things he did was he put some lighting into 4 headlights into that car. I'll take my hat off to him. Better than I could do, actually. Paul McCarty and Scaler sent me some images. Really nice scenery there. And I love this one. There's a guy reading his newspaper underneath the light just outside the library. And this is an interesting scene, I think you'd admit. Paul's actually worked on some moon lighting, so that he's really got sort of an ethereal effect there. It's very, very interesting. Looks like a Thomas Kincaid type of painting to me. So I'm longing to go out and take a look at it in first person. So, but here's another. Paul Bacadero, it's just nice getting ring. You can see the lamps there, rather fun. And of course that's there's quite a lot of bright lights around there, or it's quite bright, so you can see how well those stand out. Lynn Clock, he's up in Amherst, and he had some interesting layout where he'd lit an inn, but he also there he is with one of his tugboats lit. But this is what really interested me. He had basically a wharf there, and there's sort of a barge with the trucks on it and rail lines. And the lighting, he just drilled a hole in the sides and stuck raw fibres out, and it looks perfect. The other thing he did was he stuck a fibre underneath the overhang there in that building, and he's got this light. Now, I'd been working on something where I thought I would have to build something that would have a 90-degree bend in it so that the light could shine down. No, all he did was run the fibre up, drill a hole in the building, run the fibre out, leave it there. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to see if I could work that on my layout. And there is one of my buildings with a small door, and I did exactly the same and got some light on it that way, so very easily. So I threw my project out the window. I'd learnt something very great from one of my customers. I love it when you can light facades. One of the easy things you can do, and I'm going to show that, I'm hoping, a bit later, is this church, for example. You can just stick a fibre up surreptitiously through the layout. You don't need to sit it far through it, so it's showing, and it's just going to beam light out onto a building. And here is some very, very nicely lit church. Now, Steve Duranix, he is a Canadian, and he does some lovely work with buildings, and he'd used our system to light this building, I think, quite artistically. One of my greatest interests here was the signage. So he'd actually lit that signage up using the fibre optics. Great job on that. I've mentioned Al Judy before. Here he is. He's lit some of his scenery. And Al does a lot of work with, well, as you go see, narrow gauge. And Al said to me, you know, Michael, he said, this is the best thing that's happened to model railroading in the last 10 years. And I must admit, I was rather surprised and taken aback by that. Those are some more shots from his. Malcolm Sokol, that's another one, another customer, nice downtown scene. And this one I just got, this from Jim Roberts. And I love the parking lot with the highway lamps that we've got, and of course some of the buildings that are lit. Well, I got enthused recently to do some work on my own layout. I rarely get any time to do that. So I decided to put in some of the globe lamps along a waterfront, Then I just put some lighting into those cars. And it turned out to be a very, very simple job. And the rear of those, I put 4 lights into the rear lights of that car and just painted them red. And there we go. A simpler model to work with was an O-gauge police car, a Jaguar. Again, just popped some lights into there, and that was a simple job. One of my customers just sent me this from his layout, and of course he's got the lights all on, but there are the lights on the bus and the lights, so he's really provided a lot of lighting in his system. Well, our newest product is billboards, and we've got a range of different billboards, and you can see them here lit up on my layout there. You can see that really, even though the lights are on, you can have quite a good effect. Now this says, Trenton makes, the world takes. Now that's a bridge in Trenton, New Jersey. Michael Dettinger, who was at the NMRA MER meeting last October in Philadelphia, before that he'd actually put this together, and he asked us, would you please light this bridge? Well, I didn't have a clue how it would be done. I'm in Australia. Meanwhile, Austin, who's the oldest of my grandsons, our senior dwarf, as we call him, got to working on this and came up with some lighting. And there it is. What he did actually was he nicked the fibre and created that lighting. And we can talk about that further. Hopefully he's going to write a paper for that, which might come out in one of the magazines, and you'll learn exactly how he did that. Well, in April, I was very grateful that Cody had put together a 2-page spread in that magazine where he'd taken some lights that had been installed but had never been lit, and he just pulled them out and put in some of the Dwarvin lamps, and again very, very quickly, which sort of demonstrated to him as well as others how quickly you can put lights in. Right, I'd like to show you something about lighting a church. So here's the church, and if I take that up, all we've got are 3 fibres, 1mm fibres coming up. We've actually got some coffee stirrers stuck in there so as to keep the fibres fairly straight, and you can see it's very easy to move them in and out of there. On the church itself, we've put some foil on the bottom, on the roof rather of it, and also where we've got the windows, we've actually coated those so you can't see through the plastic. That's a typical problem with many of the models around. So the plastic tends to be rather thin. Of course, there's some gravestones attached to the side. Well, we'll put them back down so they can enjoy sitting down there. And then we've got the effect of, the light on there. Now, one of the things you will notice is, in fact, that there's quite a bit of light on the front of this church, and it's really coming from this little light down here. In fact, if I put my finger over there, you can see the effect of that. That's just a single fibre that has been stuck, drilled a hole, stuck the fibre down there. All you can see is the end of that fibre, and because of the spread of the light, it gives you a nice glow onto the church building. So what we need to do now is just go and turn the lights down a bit more so as to really make the scene pop a little bit more. I think you can see that's quite an attractive church, and again you can really see the effect of that light on the front. It's difficult for me to put my hand in front of it, and that's a good way to be able to light buildings easily. Well, so here's the summary of the different products that we have. We have the swan neck lamps, globe lamps, carriage lamps, industrial building lamps, highway lamps, different sizes of fibre, 4 different sizes that we carry. We also have just released our billboards, and one of the newest products we're working on is flashing fibres, and individually flashing fibres, which can be changed and so on in terms of their flash frequency, and I think that's going to be an exciting product, another Lamplighter product that we're going to be coming out with. So here's some pricing on them, and I realize this sounds a little bit commercial, but here we go. We've talked about the Lamplighter 1 starter kit. It has 30 foot of fibre in it. $85. For the Lamplighter 2 with 60 foot of fibre, that's $139. The lamps are manual sets of 3, $22.50, except for the O gauge, which are a set of 2 for the same price. Industrial building lamps, $19 for 3 of those. And then the fibres, you can see the range of pricing there, and for the connectors. Well, I want to thank you for listening to this. And also I want to thank Austin, David, Benjamin, my grandsons, Joel, my son-in-law, Heidi, my daughter, Shirley, my wife. And thank you for your interest in watching this. And of course, we're in some peculiar times right now, but that's the team. And we just thank you so much. Open for questions. Bye for now.